Hey, what is going on, people? Welcome to a brand new and special episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. As always, I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return for future episodes after you love this one. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back, and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So, today's episode is going to operate a little bit differently from our usual episodes. But before I explain further what that's going to look like, I just want to remind folks who are on YouTube to subscribe to the channel by clicking that red subscribe button. That's going to allow you to get future notifications on episodes that are coming on the channel. And if you're listening from Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, make sure you subscribe there as well. We also accept any monetary donations that you want to contribute to the Identity Talk platform so that we can continue to bring in some phenomenal guests to talk about all things education. So if you're on Cash App, the handle is #IDTALK4ED. And if you're on Venmo, you can direct your donations to at Kwame SM. That's KWAMESM. And of course, all episodes of this podcast can be found on our main website at identitytalk4educators.com. Thank you kindly. So, today, like I said, is a special episode. For one, we're going live from Freetown. So I'm in Freetown, Sierra Leone, for those who don't know. And one thing that I was apprehensive about was the connectivity, because when you're trying to do it from abroad, you just never know how the internet's going to respond. So we're taking a risk today, which is great. And I am confident that today's conversation is going to be one that y'all will leave with just full and ready to act in your classrooms. So the topic for tonight's discussion is focused on inclusive classrooms. What does it mean to create an inclusive classroom environment that's inviting to all students across the intersections? So when we talk about intersections, we're talking about not just race, we're talking about religion, we're talking about ability, we're talking about language, we're talking about culture, and all these other markers. And to help us with this conversation, I've invited three of my favorite educators on to share their expertise, but also the work that they've done in their respective school environments to try to make their environments inclusive to all students in their space. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my friends to join us in this conversation. So I have here Destiny, Clarke, Francois Thenot, and Craig Martin, three phenomenal educators. And I'm going to give each of them just the opportunity to briefly share about themselves, what they do, and why they're here. So first and foremost, I'll start with the ladies. So we're gonna go Destiny first, then Fran, and then Craig. Go ahead, Destiny.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Destiny Clarke. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as an LGBTQ plus educational consultant. I'm a former teacher. I taught high school and middle school English for 7 years. And now I'm in the consulting space. And so I provide coaching and curriculum resources for teachers to bring in, like Kwame was talking about, those inclusive practices into their classrooms.
Awesome. All right.
Hi, my name is Françoise. My pronouns are she in English and ella in Español. I am a racialized immigrant from Chile. I'm still dealing with the immigration system here in the United States. I I, you could say that I'm a language expert. My bachelor's degree is in ESL education, and then my master's degree is in early childhood and elementary, but I worked for the last 12 years as a Spanish teacher. I've also been in bilingual classrooms. So my job is basically where A bar approaches and decolonization lens meets languages. Um, I do a lot of work outside being an educator that is related to this intersection. I've done presentations. I've been nominated for 2 awards in ACTFL. I'm currently doing a building up with the actual amazing people a seminar about creating brave affirming spaces for LGBTQ plus students in world language classrooms. So that's basically me.
Right. And last but not least, Craig, what's going on, brother?
Hey, what is going on, family? I'm Craig Martin. I'm a school leader here in Boston, KA Community Bridge Boston Charter School. We're right in Roxbury. This is year 20. I'm going into year 21 in this business, in this work that we do, in this call. So I'm vintage at this juncture, which is pretty exciting. Um, for me, the work is not is in my call, the center of what I do, and who I hope that I am out in this world is to create bold and rich spaces for young people and their educators and caregivers to thrive. And so I've been a school leader now almost 10 years. I'm still a classroom teacher because I don't mind jumping into a classroom, and I have no problem from kindergarten all the way through probably middle school, high schoolers. Like, I'm gonna leave that to to destiny to do that work. But for me, it is it is always about driven by the question of how can we how can we provide all the resources and tools and supports so that our young people with all of the host of identities they have can thrive. So
Hmm.
let's have the conversation. I'm excited. So excited, y'all.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I like the way that you chose the word vintage to describe your experience. That's just the right word to use. Yes. Um, so for those who are watching us live, um, we do have the comment section, whether you're watching from YouTube or Facebook. So if you want to chime in while we're having a conversation, um, all is welcome, with your input. So please don't be bashful, share freely. And if something resonates with us, we'll definitely post it up for everybody to see. But I want to start us off from the beginning. So typically, when I start the podcast, I usually ask all my guests to just share how they got into education, but I want to remix it a little bit. Since we're talking about being inclusive in our classroom, I want to focus on our own journeys
Mhm.
because each of us, I'm assuming, had to deal with some challenges as far as trying to reconcile or embrace our identities, however we define them,
Mhm.
and use our identities to navigate our respective school spaces. So I want to open up the conversation by asking each of you all to just share if you've experienced any of those struggles with your identity and just showing up as your authentic self. And if so, how did those struggles impact the way that you navigated the different spaces you were in? So I'm gonna let Francois go first, and then I'll just work my way back up.
Okay. So I had two different very marked experiences when it comes to interacting in schools. First, I'm Chilean, and I was born in a fascist dictatorship, kindly sponsored by United States. So you could say my trauma comes from being a woman in a environment that is hostile to women in general. I was lucky enough to attend public school, and it was an all girls school. And I know my teachers, all women, also did their best to empower us somehow. But enduring that sort of silent violence was something that marked me for life, and I think it made me more of a rebel and a radical, because I got to see first in my own experience, in my own skin, what it was to be conditioned. For example, we were knitting clothes for babies in 5th grade. That was the expectation of our role as women. And I think my nature, which is more intellectual and a little bit over the place, didn't fit the what was a woman or a girl expected to be. Fortunately, I had a mother that always supported that side of me and needed all my projects that I needed to need because I was really bad at it. But it was something that I still to this day remember. And the second experience that I can share with you is as an immigrant and coming as a teacher to United States. Uh, I've been feeling out of place most of the time, because United States spaces are usually on appearance welcome to immigrants, but
Mm.
down deep inside, it's not really welcoming. And I have found that the environments, and this is going to sound really strong, but bear with me, are a lot of the environments, the school environments are really centered on white supremacy culture. And that is something that I've been brought up to go against it, especially when my country stopped being a dictatorship. And I read for the first time Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So I'm usually the person that it's loud about the things that are not equitable, and that gets me in trouble sometimes. But these are two experiences that I would say that I have felt like fish out of the water, but I that have made me um, struggle and at the same time thrive.
So yeah.
So I definitely had some struggles in navigating a school space as well. I'm a queer person in North Carolina, so it is a little difficult to navigate that space. And especially, I really love y- it's Francois.
Françoise, yeah.
Okay. So I love what you said about white supremacy culture like functioning in schools, because that's really something that we need to address as a
Mhm.
collective. And that we kind of see that in the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric as well. That's, an identity that is marginalized by that as well. And I think that being here in North Carolina, it just depends. Some schools are more inclusive than others, and so some of those environments have been easier to navigate than others, but in general it has been difficult to navigate as a queer person here. um, yeah.
All right, Craig, what do you want to add to the conversation, brother?
Well, for me, I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. A little gumbo, a little jambalaya, in regards to our experiences. And so for me coming up in K-12 education, unapologetically, I'm dark chocolate. So you just get all of this, from the moment you see.
Struggle's
And
real
so
for us, brother. Struggle's real for us.
so for me, growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana, 6'3". I was a little bit thicker than I am today, thicker than more Snickers. And so for me, there was multiple areas that I had to navigate. One, being a dark chocolate brother, I had to compete with the light skinned friends. So all the Drakes of the world, the bars for those who got a little age and seasoning on them. That was one. So we talked about colorism, in the spectrum of being primarily in environments of young people of color. I also recognize that bodies is also, when we talk about identities, because I heard Francois talk about, citizenship, and Destiny talking about being, part of the queer community or LGBTQ community, as am I. And so I recognize that for me coming up, I wasn't safe to be black and male and gay. In many spaces in my K-12 experience, my teachers didn't know how to deal with it. They knew how to deal with me being smart or smart mouth, depending on which teacher you talk to. Because I too wanted to push against, why is this group think a thing? I grew up in a Catholic school. I'm like, why is it that I got to talk to the priest? That's a middleman. Like, I thought you told me I need to talk to up high. I don't understand what's going on here. So, like, I too was pushing up against things that, I was like, I don't understand why, I was gonna say some things. I probably like that's a whole different podcast. But what I would say, I'm feeling comfortable. I'm feeling comfortable. Thank you, Kwame, for making us feel comfortable. What I would say, in closing out my thoughts here briefly, um, it is it definitely was a lot to navigate, and you had to have the right teachers to provide the kind of tools and resources to navigate the complexity. I'm
Mm-hmm.
grateful I had people who were guardian angels and right at the right time in the right spaces, who were incredible teachers who saw something in me and found that they were going to do what they could do so that the light in me would not extinguish. And so I'm really grateful for incredible teachers who saw something beyond my melanin, my height. They saw something and wanted to help nurture it so that it actually would manifest to, where I am today.
Mm. Yes. And Craig, that is yeah, we gotta give some snaps for that.
Gotta snap.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's a perfect segue into my next question, because when we're talking about creating that inclusive environment, we always hear these terms: creating a safe space, creating a brave space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed is that a lot of people use those two terms interchangeably to like mean the same thing, when in all actuality it doesn't. Um, and I think as we're doing this work, it's important that we unpack what it means to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
What does it really mean to be brave? Because right now we're in a safe space where we're able to speak freely about our experiences with our identities, but it's brave in the sense that we're sharing things that maybe when we were like 11, 12, 13, or in our teenage years, we didn't have the courage to share because of fear of, ridicule or consequence. So I'm gonna open up the floor for y'all, and it doesn't matter who shares, but when we're talking about inclusive spaces, how do we distinguish between a brave space and a safe space? Because a lot of us may not even know what it is who are watching us today. So, what is the distinction between those two?
I can go first. I just recorded a
Go
video for
for it.
Axel about this. So, according to what I've been learning about, and this is the reason we call the seminar Brave Spaces instead of Safe Spaces. So we might all have different ideas of what these terms means, because I mean we are people with diversity of opinions and backgrounds. But in general, I would say that a safe space, it's a little bit of the ideal that we would like to have, and it's very hard to reach, because it would be a space where there are no microaggressions. I mean, hopefully not microaggressions, and but neither microaggressions, macro or micro, the big ones and the small ones. So like assuring, for example, our students that we are going to create a safe space, it will be sort of a little bit disingenuous, in the sense of we have a community that brings their own biases, that it brings their own backgrounds to our space, and we cannot assure a kid that kid is not gonna suffer, for example, microaggression by another kid that doesn't unintentionally. But when we talk about brave spaces, it means first that marginalized people had to bring themselves bravely into that space, because we know that we can be exposed to anything that can happen to us, any micro or micro aggressions, but it also means that we come from a place of opening and learning, and that people in that space are going to be held accountable by the community if they slip up. And all of us have the potential to make a mistake and say something wrong, because we are in this journey that it's never ending, and that is long lasting. So that's what I like, the idea of a brave space, because it gives us space for mistakes that we can be held accountable for, and that we can redress and growth.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Everybody else want to chime in? I have something, but I'm gonna hold it until.
Um, yeah, if I could add, I have a really big problem with the idea of safe space, because I think that safe means something different to everyone.
Mhm.
And that, as you mentioned before, like that's kind of disingenuous to offer this space to our students that honestly doesn't really exist,
Yeah.
because we can't ensure that everyone is going to feel safe, whether it's safe in their identity, safe in the building,
Mhm. Yeah.
that we face such a big challenge in creating an affirming space for
Mhm.
students. And I think that safe is a very misleading word to use. Um, and so when I work with educators, I encourage them to use principled spaces, kind of similar to brave spaces, that the classroom is governed and, um, the classroom is driven by principles. So,
Mhm.
like, we share the same values, that people are important and their identities are important, and that, your feelings are valid, and like what you're experiencing in the classroom is an experience. And I think
Mhm.
that when you take that collective approach,
Yes.
and use your principles to really guide what you want your classroom to look like, that's a much better outcome than
Mhm.
um, empty promises of a safe space.
I agree.
Yeah. I would love to add, if
Yeah.
that's okay. S- and I too have, been interrogating this question of what is a brave space. One, you as an educator have to create the conditions so that people feel emotionally safe or vulnerable enough
Mhm.
that they can
Yeah.
bring different parts of themselves to the space. But you have to feel comfortable and solid and confident in all that you bring to the table, or just an
Hmm.
awareness of how you show up in the space,
Mhm.
because then you are going to be, I would say, divinely connected, or you're going to create an opportunity to ensure that you're connected enough to the different souls who are in your space,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that you are not going to put them in harm's way by
Mhm.
creating an environment where, when they share something deep, where they share parts of
Mhm.
themselves that hurt them, that may
Mhm.
cause harm, they've experienced trauma with, that you have created enough
Right.
support
Mhm.
systems in the space. How do you have the conversations? What are the safe words or ways that you can say, you know what, I'm okay with, let's pass today, or I don't feel like I have the ability to show up
Mhm.
and you need me to, and that it's okay, and that there's
Mhm.
multiple ways for young people and educators, if we're talking about it from a professional development perspective,
Mhm.
there's still multiple ways to access the conversation, have places where you can get support, and also know that there are tools that
Mhm.
you're constantly using all the time in those spaces, that people understand that they're held accountable to them. So if
Mhm.
you are the guardian in that
Yes.
space, you
Yes.
hold everyone to the same norms.
Mhm.
What is said in this space is nurtured. Doesn't
Mhm.
mean you accept everything that's coming up, but you have the ability to just acknowledge that that is the way that that person is actually feeling, or that's their thoughts, and that's what they're carrying. Our job as educators is to facilitate dialogue
Mhm.
so that we can have
Yes.
human connection and a greater awareness to who we
Mhm.
are in the spaces we're in. If we can do that, then
Yes.
I think people are more apt to be brave and step out into places they've never been, especially when they can say, you know what, I did create harm when I said this or
Mhm.
did this to you, or said nothing. And I didn't know that I was harming you by saying
Mhm.
nothing. You know, and when
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
you can do those things, then I think that that's a brave space that's thriving, and the
Mhm.
humanity rises. And that's the goal. That's the goal. You want the humanity to rise.
Mhm.
Mm. And I
Totally.
feel like, yeah, and I feel like when we use the word brave, not even brave, safe, usually when people hear the word safe, they tend to equate it with the preservation of white comfort.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what makes the word safe dangerous. That operative word safe
Mhm.
is like this
Mhm.
idea of, okay, so that means that I don't that I am above criticism.
Mhm.
That means that if I make a mistake, I don't have to take responsibility for the mistake
Mhm.
or the harm that I've
Mhm.
imposed on somebody within my community, which
Mhm.
is erroneous. But I think that's how it's been used in different spaces.
Mhm.
And I think that's why I'm so particular about making sure that
Mhm.
we properly define what it is to be in a safe space.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the brave part is what allows us to let people know that, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. Hey,
Mhm.
yes, it's okay to make mistakes, but what's important is how you respond after you make the mistake.
I
That's what
see.
makes you brave, is being vulnerable and being able to
Mhm.
acknowledge that the mistake has been made and you've imposed the harm.
Yes.
Both
Yeah.
students and educators, I think that
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. But that's always something that I like to throw out there. Now, in saying that, right, a lot of this work that we do involves awareness.
Mhm.
And this awareness is something that even to this day, we're still trying to develop within ourselves.
Mhm.
So, one day I was just talking with my wife, and I had mentioned the fact that in order for us to really do anti-bias, anti-racist work, in order for us to be that inclusive classroom educator, there has to be this consistent awareness of 3 P's:
Mhm.
privilege, positionality,
Mhm.
power.
Mhm.
And I feel like if you're able to maintain those 3 things, you're always going to be doing this work in earnest.
Mhm.
It's not going to come off as being performative or
Mhm.
disingenuous. That's just my thought about it. But I'm
Mhm.
interested in hearing from you all how you feel those 3 P's influence the work that we do in creating inclusive spaces in the classroom. So anybody can jump in. Yeah, it's a deep
I,
question, so we got to
I
give it
don't
some thought.
I don't I don't mind jumping in. It's like double dutch.
Yeah,
I was waiting. I'm like, well, I'll just
like
sit back.
uh, uh,
Go, Craig.
Well,
Go for it, man.
so I got some age on me. Just so that y'all know, this is not baby skin anymore. But it's it is. I say that to say this. 20 years in education at this juncture, I've had the privilege of being in particular spaces where I've been able to help shape the context of a classroom to how the school actually runs and functions every day. I've been able to hire educators from all over the world to serve young people at whatever campus I've been at.
Mhm.
I do recognize every day that my American citizenship status, my being 6'3", me being a male, me actually being in a middle class, environment or income, all are privileges that I walk in the door with without even opening my mouth. And
Mhm.
it is I have to have that awareness because I do realize that when I walk into those spaces, some people don't carry that. And so the question really for me always is how do I do my part so that it's less of me and more of the people who need the service, who need the space? How do I create the platform so other people in their persona, all that they bring to the table has a space where they can talk and share and explore. They can lead and walk. You know, how do I do that? And I don't take any of that for granted.
Mhm.
But people have to recognize that even the small things that they take for granted,
Mhm.
you have the ability to lay your head on a pillow tonight. You can put cover over yourself. You can
Mhm.
actually decide with $20, I want to go to McDonald's or I want to go to X and get me a meal. Some people don't have that. They don't
Mhm.
have the ability to make those kinds of
Mhm.
choices today. Some of us, like I'm sitting on my deck, I am not necessarily concerned about my safety and
Mhm.
welfare, but there are people in other parts of the
Mhm.
world where this is a danger to them to be outside.
Mhm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how do you actually raise that level of awareness, and how do you actually create a space where people have that consciousness, and then they are doing the very intentional work to ensure
Mhm.
different people are in power or in position to be able to hear their voices, elevate their consciousness, and create a greater awareness that they
Mhm.
can and bring other people along. So I
Mhm.
do recognize that, and there's some stuff I still don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure out
Mhm.
because it requires me to be in different spaces where people are constantly challenging me, like, Craig, you realize that X, wow, I
Mhm.
didn't know that. I only know my lived experience and
Mhm.
experiences sharing with me from others. And so
Yes.
just being aware of that can do a lot, and raising that in conversation lets people know that you too are keenly aware.
Yeah. For me, a turning point was meeting Kimberly Crenshaw at a POCC conference and learning about intersectionality. I think that helped me a lot. I had read Paulo Freire, and Paulo Freire discusses a lot the dynamic about being an oppressed oppressor, which is, I think, something, a dynamic that all of us experience, But I think learning for Kimberly Crenshaw helped me put all those ideas in a very, very practical way. Like I can unpack my privilege. I'm a racialized Latina. I don't like to use that term anymore. I'm a racialized immigrant. I am a woman, but I'm also cisgender, heterosexual, and I'm also light skinned Latina. So I am oppressed, but I can also have the potential to be the oppressor. And as unpacking that without defensiveness and from a place of vulnerability, I think it's something that we should do in front of our students too. I have worked in independent schools for the last 14 years, and there's a lot of privilege in the kids that I taught, and unpacking the privilege is very, very uncomfortable. So I usually start myself, and I thank all the teachers that I have had along the road that made me feel safe redundantly, about opening up myself and acknowledging my privileges, and also seeing the ways that I'm oppressed in a clear way. But I always start my webinars, and the hardest conversation in my classroom happen from with me opening up. This it's me. These are my privileges. I experience all these things that are hard every day, but I also don't experience that. And I cannot speak for a person that have that lived experience, because my lived experience is unique. And what I can do for that other person that experiencing that is listening with an open mind and an open heart. I think Craig talked about souls. I do believe that too. I believe in community, and that when you're vulnerable, uh, I think your students have that chance to open up too.
Yes.
Yeah. Um.
So
Oh, go ahead.
go for it. No,
Oh,
go
I
for it.
just
You
was.
got it.
I I am a white female, so I have a lot of privileges, and I think that it's super super important for um white people especially, like let's just keep it real right now, to acknowledge your privilege, but not just acknowledge it, that you need to continuously be divesting from white supremacy culture and understanding how that has influenced the choices that you've made previously in your life, and how it will also continue to affect the choices that you make and the choices that you have. Because as it was mentioned before, that not everybody has the same choices offered to them based
Mhm,
on different privileges, and that it takes more than just acknowledging it. You have to
mhm,
continue to invest in that work and move away from white supremacy culture that has been so deeply rooted and embedded in our
mhm,
society. And I think that our positionality shapes the reality of our experiences, and
mhm,
so it allows for us to, well, for me in particular, to acknowledge how my distinct identities influence how I approach the classroom,
mhm,
and how I can take the opportunity to learn about other identities,
mhm,
create these spaces, be in spaces where my voice is not the voice that's being heard.
mhm,
That uplifting other voices and other marginalized communities and groups is so super important, and that that's an important part of using your privilege purposefully.
mhm,
Yes. And all these things are important for us to recognize.
mhm,
And what I love about this group is the fact that you are coming in with different skill sets, different sets of expertise, all within this umbrella of an issue that we're talking about. So I want to switch things up and really hone in on the work that you all do specifically within your specific roles
mhm.
in the school. And I'm gonna switch up the view because I want to refresh it a little bit. There we go. So yeah, I just gotta freshen it up a little bit. So I'm interested in learning about how each of you within your respective roles show students that they belong in the classroom, or in Craig's case, school, since he's a school leader. So Craig is a school leader. Francoise is a language teacher. Destiny, you taught English for many years at the middle high school level. I was a math teacher. So we're all coming in teaching different areas and coming in with different roles. So what's gonna happen is each of you are gonna get your question, and I'm gonna have you all just share how you all do it within your roles. So I'm gonna start with Destiny. And I know with you, Destiny, you do a lot of work with trying to bring in LGBTQ plus inclusive education,
Hmm.
particularly in the history realm. But I want
Hmm.
to take it a step further and find out from you, how do you how can you get teachers and school leaders to create queer affirming learning spaces for students?
So I got to get my notes out. Because there are just so many ways that we can do this. I
Mhm.
think that often when we're asked that question or we're thinking about that question as educators, that it can be a little overwhelming because you're like, well, maybe that's not part of your identity. You don't know how to create a space like that. And
Mhm.
so, my advice for teachers in creating these queer affirming spaces for their students, and also just want to add in there, also the queer staff that exists there
Mhm.
too. Because, as a queer educator myself, that my school needed to be a safe environment for me and it needed to be a safe environment for my students. So one really big way that we can do that is to provide representation, whether that's in your curriculum, your school events, your physical look of your classroom, whether you have like the intersectionality flag or just a little rainbow or something that signifies that you are supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. And if you feel a little overwhelmed about incorporating it into your curriculum, that you could start small. Maybe it's just an example, like a word problem where there's a non binary person or the singular they is being used. Um, and the second thing that I recommend to teachers is to address your bullying and harassment. That I think that when we hear that, sometimes we're like, "Oh, we don't have a bullying problem," or like, and not at our school. This is a safe zone, and that we're doing our students such a disservice because we're not actively taking a role in creating that environment. And that sometimes we can feel really nervous about approaching these situations, but we do more harm by not
Mhm.
approaching the situations because our students see that. They see our reaction, they see that we're not saying anything. So not only are you're losing that connection that you have with that student, but then you're setting a precedent
Mhm.
for how you handle uncomfortable situations that may not affect you directly. And that's the opposite of what we want to do when we are trying to create those queer spaces, or excuse me, queer affirming spaces for our
Mhm.
students and staff.
Mm. And I think that's so important because one thing that I've come to realize is this is something that's always I mean race is always touchy, but when we talk about gender and sexuality, that's just as touchy because for one, I feel like a lot of people get intimidated by just
Mhm.
the language and the nuances
Mhm.
of it,
Mhm.
right? And even for
Mhm.
myself, for me to be able to say now that, I'm a cisgendered, heterosexual black male,
Mhm.
I couldn't say that 2 years ago. I had to
Mhm.
learn that from talking to different people,
Mhm.
right? Um, and I think a lot of us are so afraid to make a mistake that we don't even act. Like you were
Mhm.
mentioning, we just decide to go into a state of inaction in order to avoid making a mistake. But when we do that, we're doing our students a disservice.
Mhm.
And then that goes back to what we said about being brave. So I just wanted to just add that.
Yeah, and I'll add that learning and listening is great, and I think that it's super important for us to learn more about identities that are outside of our own. But as you said, that sometimes people become so just wrapped up in wanting to learn the next thing so that they don't make mistakes that subsequently they're doing nothing. So learning and listening is great, but it won't lead to liberation. You have to take
Mhm.
action, and so I think that that's a really like big and important distinction. While you are learning, and it is important that you also have to take action and you also have to like play an active role in that.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So we're gonna shift from LGBTQ plus inclusive education to now languages. And for people that have been following my podcast for the past couple of years, I've done a whole lot of episodes focused on language
Mhm.
in the classroom. And Francoise has been on my podcast, and we've had some great conversations about
Mhm.
this very issue.
Mhm.
And for those who don't know, Francoise has taught ESL
Mhm.
and Spanish in a different school setting she's been in, so she has a lot of experience when it comes to that.
Mhm.
Um, so Francoise, my question to you is,
Mhm.
how can world language teachers, so whether you are teaching French, whether you're teaching Spanish, whether you're teaching Mandarin, whatever language you're teaching, how can they cultivate inclusive classroom environments that are honoring the intersectional identities of their students? What would that look like in that setting?
Wow, this is a charged question because the answer is a whole book that I intend to write one day. So I would say it's not that different from any other classroom, because a word language classroom should be a classroom where language is taught as a vehicle, as content. I believe languages are, I don't believe, I'm sure languages are part of people's identities. Like, I'm racialized because I speak Spanish in the United States. So your language is your identity. So I think languages should be humanized and take it out of that context of a grammar-based approach or a mechanical approach to teaching languages. And when you bring people in the mix, it's when you can actually uh, participate of a praxis as described by Paulo Freire as theory, reflection, and action upon the world in order to change it. When you acknowledge that languages are people identities, it's not hard to bring that sort of inclusion and belonging to your classroom. First of all, those of us that are teaching languages that were used as tool of oppression by colonizers, we need to acknowledge that this is where the language is coming from. Second of all, we need to acknowledge that languages are spoken by diasporas. So the first thing that we need to do in our classrooms is uh, acknowledge that there are so many different realities. There are so many different experiences. There are so many different cultures within a diaspora that speaks a language, that it's very important to present the diaspora as a diaspora and not as a monolith in your classroom.
Mhm.
And when you have the diaspora, when you acknowledge that a language was used to oppress other people, when you know that language is part of people's identity, then your lens, it's refined, and you have the right lens to create resources and design your curriculum and bring mirrors, windows, and sliding doors for your students. It's very important for students, for example, in my Spanish class, to acknowledge that there are people that look like them, sound like them, and maybe have similar experience that are speaking the language too. For example, one of the jobs that I put on myself in these latest years in my Spanish class was for my students to see Spanish not as a foreign language, but as a language that is spoken by 41 million people in the United States. So that foreign word, it creates otherness. Uh, Another thing that is really important is that a language classroom, especially those languages like Spanish that are binary, should be a place of openness, in the sense that we need to learn the ways and how to make the language inclusive, especially for non-binary students. um, and think about the students that are the most marginalized because of their identity, and show those beautiful mirrors for them in our curriculum and everywhere. As Destiny said, our classroom needs to be um, our bulletin boards, our classroom, everything needs to reflect that sort of belonging and welcoming. So, word language is the perfect place to create that sense of belonging, that inclusion, and it's the teacher's choice to refine their lens and see the ways in which they can be inclusive or not. Dr. Jose Medina, one of my favorites, always says, you can teach languages either to oppress or to liberate. And I would encourage every word language teacher here to see the ways to refine their lens with background knowledge, to acknowledge the positionality of the language. For example, Spanish is a subordinate language in the United States, but it's not a foreign language. There are 41 million people speaking Spanish in the United States. When we know that positionality, when we acknowledge that the speakers are a diaspora, that unfortunately indigenous languages disappear because of the imposition of Spanish, then we have the right lens and what to include in our curriculum, how to design our resources to make them more welcoming for our whole class. Kwame, you're silent.
Nah, I'm not anymore. Um, now, I actually have a question about Romance languages, particularly French and
Mhm,
Spanish,
mhm.
because as you already know, there are a lot of countries that
Yeah,
speak different dialects of each of those languages.
yeah.
And we'll just use Spanish as an example. So I've
Mhm,
interviewed Spanish speaking educators, whether they come
mhm,
from Cuba,
mhm,
Nicaragua,
mhm.
um, Chile,
Mhm,
uh, Mexico,
mhm,
and I've always been fascinated by just the difference in certain terminologies across the different dialects
mhm.
and how one dialect is more oppressed than the other within the classroom.
Yes.
So if you were to have, let's say, um, a Chilean,
Mhm.
um, a Chicano, Cuban, or any other
A Spaniard.
Spanish speaker in the classroom, and they're all in the
Mhm,
same stage.
mhm,
Spaniard, right?
mhm,
What I've learned is usually the Spaniard, and in some cases,
mhm,
Mexican, the way that this Spanish is centered more than all the other dialects,
mhm.
which makes me wonder why is even that the case, and how come we're not humanizing all the different dialects and being inclusive in that regard?
I think that it's colonization. The problem is colonization because if you see the languages that are more demonized, is the languages, and I'm telling you because my geolect, this is how I call my dialects because they depending on the geographical area, right? My
Yes.
geolect, it's very much one of the most demonized because we drift so far away from what Castilian Spanish is. And I want to bring a little bit of history here. Castilian was not the language talk at the peninsula widely spoken before the colonization of Al-Andalus. The Spanish peninsula was Al-Andalus, which was for 700 years I wouldn't say Muslim, but it was ruled by people from North Africa. And the religions were existing in some sort of harmony, and Mozarabe and other languages. There was a large diversity of language. So in order to colonize and make Spain Spain and a unified Christian Catholic power, Castilian was imposed. So when these Castilians came and colonized all these lands where Spanish is spoken, they brought the same ideology. We need to make Spanish the most powerful, Castilian the most powerful sort of communication, so we can obliterate the other choices. So our dialects, the most they drift away from Castilian is the resistance of our ancestors. Like just to give you an example, Chilean has a lot of indigenous words, either Quechua, Mapuche. My first word as a baby was the word guagua, that in Quechua means baby. Just to tell you how strong this is. So I feel very passionate about this. So what happens and why we have this hierarchy when it comes to languages is a result of colonization. There's this illusion of standard language that the Real Academia de la Lengua installed. And the most you're close to that illusion of a standard, because standard doesn't exist, it shouldn't, the more acceptance you have. The more you speak like your dialect, the farther you get away from Castilian, the more demonized you are. And that's why a lot of Caribbean countries that speak Spanish are on the same level as Chilean dialect. They get looked down on, and they have a lot of words from Yoruba, and the pronunciation has a lot of that uh, rhythm that comes from their ancestors too. So you see, all this demonization has to do with colonization. It has to do with the adoration by the of the colonizers, the Castilians, and that's why it gets on my nerves when my people that were oppressed by the Spaniards are defending the language of the colonizer. It can be a long talk, but in a nutshell, this is what it is.
Yeah. Mm. Yes, it is deep. It's super, super deep.
It is.
So the last part that we want to talk about is school leadership. And of course, we have principals, we have administrators who have a critical role in ensuring that faculty members, staff members, and even students are in a space where they feel like they can be themselves. So, Craig, I'm coming to you, brother. I'm interested in knowing, just based on your experience as a school leader, what role should principals and administrators play in ensuring that our schools are being inclusive and they're being led in a way such that our students aren't leaving their any parts of their identities at the door?
So of course I get, a tough question coming after Destiny and Francois. Because I just want to talk about what Francois was talking about, because I was like, oh yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead,
no,
brother.
because that's not the question. You got this question on the screen, so I'm gonna do this thing. There's several things that I'm thinking about. But one of the things that settled in my spirit comes from Dr. Brene Brown, that talks about trust is built in the small moments.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
understand that I'm an architect of the atmosphere that young people walk in every day. Whether or not I am the chief or I'm the consultant, for us, are we good? Okay, there we go. All right. Technical difficulties, but that's all right. I'm still alive in color. Hey, people. All right. I was like, what's the whirly thing? That's a whole thing. All right. Back to this. I recognize that our young people and families, the first thing you want to do is be able to say, "Hey, how are you?" and call them by their name.
Mhm.
You recognize in like infinitely when a young person feels like you know my name. You may not know all about me, but you know my name and you call me by my name. That is a gift that keeps on giving. Then when they walk into the space environmentally, from the scent and aromatherapy. So we've got to the place where we do a little lavender, we do a little lemongrass, we do a little vanilla in the atmosphere, because we want you to feel like this is home, because you're gonna be here for 9 or 10 hours or more, depending on whether or not you do sports or clubs or other things. You're home, and you're a home away from home. But environmentally, if you walk into our campus now, there are flags that are in our library, in our atrium. So when you walk in, flags of different cultures are represented. We still have work to do. I don't want people to feel like we're United Nations. We're close, but we're not there yet, right? But when you even today, there was someone from a summer program who walked in and was like, "Oh my God, I came in and I saw my flag of Guyana here. Oh, it feels like home." I'm like, yes, just for you. I didn't know that this person who was going to serve in our school community. So we prepare the environment for the world. We are not going to sit here and limit our ability to create inclusive and welcoming spaces to just those people who are there all the time. I'm
Mhm.
preparing all the time for global citizens of
Mhm.
the world who are going to take the world by storm.
Mhm.
There's something, there's a quote by Ralph Ellison that says, if you can show me how I can cling to that is real to me
Mhm.
while teaching me a way into the large society, then and only then will I drop my defenses and hostility, and I will sing your praises and help you to make the desert bear fruit.
Mhm.
And that's Ralph Ellison.
Ooh.
Mhm.
So that thing there is deep.
Mhm.
Mm.
When I take and unpack that, right? I take and unpack that. What I think about is I need you to see yourself in different parts of the experience without even opening your mouth. So that could be the flags. That could be, what is it that we have as
Mhm.
environmental print? Do you see queer, and LGBTQIA members on the walls, on posters?
Mhm.
Also see and experience different cuisines in the meals we serve. And we have our farm to table in my school community, a great privilege that we have. So we have the ability to also ensure you are experiencing your cuisines that remind you of home, grandma,
Mhm.
abuela, that too is important. Then we look at what books are in the library. So I know, one of the questions is about, books, but
Mhm.
what books am I going to find? And are they representative of a variety of cultures? These happen to be written by Black women. I
Mhm.
can talk about the fact that there's incredible Black women who've written books for children. So this
Mhm.
is actually for you, and it was done by people who carry a
Mhm.
heritage and lineage similar to yours. How proud our young people, especially our girls, feel to know that they too have the ability to change the world by writing and rebelling against white supremacy, right? One of the things that I'm continuing to grow in. I am not an expert, and I'm sure that people are arguably say that I may have a little work to do. Is what experiences do we create around throughout the year to ensure that we're creating experiences where the people are absolutely powerful and welcome, and they get to come in and present and share about who they are, and that you do this in a way that is liberating, because I know Destiny talked about how liberating it is, right? To be able to walk into a space and know it was especially designed for you. Well, every classroom space should be especially designed for every soul, because
Mhm.
the books that are incredibly diverse, kids are writing and creating, and we want to put them on a pedestal so that they can see that they too are shining, they too are contributing to the greater world. And you have to, as a leader, create the atmosphere where you empower teachers in order to use all the tools they can, access all the tools that you can, and bring people in so that they can actually lean in. And guess what? Applaud. Like, I am so glad to see that you are rocking in this work that
Mhm.
is anti-racist, that may be, a host of things. Um, and if I happen to also have people who represent the cultures and the communities of the young people we serve, and they fill the space, that too is amazing. But I don't think that that's always the best thing to do, because you need to have people who are going to push the boundaries. I need
Mhm.
someone like Francois, and I also need Destiny to come to my campus, serve and lead in my campus, because they're going to push me too. Like, Craig, you thought you had it, but we got to work on. Like, you done got comfortable. You think, oh, okay, we got some people who look like us from teaching. We got more for you to do, because this is about making sure they're great for the world. This is not just
Mhm.
about their zip code. And so when you do that, that is one of the best love offerings we can
Mhm.
actually extend to young people, the staff that serves them, the parents that are the first teachers of the young people we serve, and the community partners who are there to serve at the will of the school community. Yes.
Mm.
Are you looking
Preach
for a
on,
Spanish
brother.
teacher?
And
Right.
I
Like,
look, I'm in between jobs. I just left my job of 12 years and I'm looking for a new community. So
Okay, okay. We should talk.
Let
There you
me
go.
let's
Come on
talk
now.
later.
Listen, yeah, y'all definitely need to talk later. Now, Craig, since you done called me out, I will give you the chance to respond to what Francoise was talking about earlier. So I'm gonna give you the floor, brother, since you done called me out, man.
What did I call you out about?
Come on, bro.
No, I don't. I really don't know. What did I call you out about? I was flowing, so I don't know what is
Oh,
it you
so
want
yeah.
me to?
So before I ask you the question about what principals should do to create inclusive spaces, you said that you wanted to respond to what Francoise was talking
Oh,
about with languages. You had something.
oh, I think that I was just very excited because see, for many Black Americans, we also talk about Black English and being able to speak in proper English, and not and so having to leave behind Ebonics or Pig Latin or what is considered to be reductive in regards to what is just the English norm. And
Yeah.
so some of what we find is anytime anything is not part of the Queen's English, it is considered to be lower class and less than. And so we have to raise that who you are and what you bring to the table, your ability to communicate in whatever ways you can are absolutely honorable. It is our job to
Mhm.
wrap our arms around you so
Yeah.
that we can continue to build connections across the classroom, across the school, across the community. But what we don't do, we're like, oh no, you got to speak in this way. Like, why do I? Why do I?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Come on
Can
now.
I say something to that?
Go for
Yes.
it. Go for it.
In the word of linguistics, we use the word repertoire, and our students bring a repertoire to our classroom. And African American vernacular, it's part of the repertoire, and it should be honored. It should be celebrated. And what do we do as teachers? It's adding more to the repertoire, but not taking away, because
Mm,
that's oppression. Every time you want to take away, because language is identity. Every time a teacher wants to take away something that belongs to the kids' repertoire, that's killing part of their identity.
yes,
Absolutely.
yes, for sure. So we're at the hour, so I want to start to wind things down. So I have one closing question and then a very quick lightning round. So the question I have for everybody is focused on growth, right? Because one thing that we know about creating these inclusive spaces is that it requires us to continue to grow in our learning as we speak. So I want to know from each of you, how are you continuing to grow in your practice and address the blind spots that you have your understanding as it pertains to diversity, equity, inclusion? Because we hear those three terms a lot, and there's still so much that each of us have to learn with regard to that realm. So I'll do this. I'll go counterclockwise and have Destiny go ahead, and then we'll work our way back up to me. So go ahead, Destiny.
Okay. Well, so I think that one big thing that I'm trying to do within my own practice is allowing myself to be wrong. That recognizing where I have caused harm and listening to others' experiences. And I think that, like, it may feel instinctual, like, oh, I didn't do that, but like, that I'm sorry. That comes first. The apology, acknowledgement that, like, I was wrong. Or, even just allowing myself the space to reflect on other people's experiences as they share them with me, and to be able to learn from those experiences and apply what I learn. Because as I mentioned earlier, that, like, while learning and listening is important, that it's also important that you take action based on what you learn from other people's experiences and what they share with you. And that, like, just allowing yourself to be in this space where you don't know it all, and that, like, when it comes especially to like LGBTQ plus inclusion, equity work, that no one has all the answers, and that this work is continuous. There is no destination, that we're just on this journey together, hopefully learning from one another. And everybody's just doing the best that they can, and that takes humility and the ability to stop and say I was wrong, and kind of learn to reduce harm in that way.
Mhm.
All right. Go ahead,
I
Craig.
think, yeah.
Oh, like, is it me now? Um,
Yep.
uh, Dr. Darnisa Amonte Jackson says, you can't have an equity heart and a pre-diversity mindset. What I take that to mean for me is these spaces here where I'm learning, like, whoa, okay, I hadn't even thought about this, and whether or not it is the power of language and literacy, or I think about, what, as a cisgender gay man, where, what levels of privilege do I hone, and what levels of positionality do I carry when I can, juxtapose that to my trans, counterparts, right? And so when I think about my growth journey, it is putting myself in new spaces with different people who are going to push my thinking, who are
Mhm.
going to constantly challenge me to say, Craig, you think you're good, but you could be greater. You could have greater impact, because you need to understand these nuggets, these
Mhm.
tools, these gems. Like, I need you to listen to me and really listen to me, because you need to carry this story or this anecdote or this part of me or this part of this young person to when you are standing in front of the state house, like, because someone needs to hear their story. And if they can't say it, you can, because you're positioned to, right? So,
Hmm.
and that goes back to the positionality. So for me, there's several things. Humble myself all the time. I am not, I am still, I learned that I'm learning, that I know less than I thought that I knew, because there are constantly people who are pulling back the layers and like showing me, yeah, you've been taught this, but we need to break that down and unpack that for you.
Mhm.
And understand how some things have been great that you've learned, but there's some things you might have said and done that are harmful. So I'm unpacking that work, because if I really am being a human being and a loving, kind, and chocolate giant that I want to be, then I'm going to keep doing this work, because there are going to be some young people who will need me in these solid moments, and I need to be in places that are going to push me. So that's how I'm gonna keep growing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So inspiring. um, I think our little uh, weakness lies where our privilege lies. So the areas of my identity where the most privilege is where I completely lack the knowledge about people that are not privileged in that way, that are marginalized. So I think the key here is to stay humble, as Craig said, and to stay open to learning, and to realize that and never take it personally. We were conditioned and socialized into these mindsets, and I'm going to blame it in colonization again. These mindsets that the colonizer put out there, and these ontological ideas, these epistemologies, they are so strong. One poet said, white supremacy is the water, it's not.
Ooh.
We are immersed in this ocean. So, of course, we are going to act, we're going to have attitudes no matter our identity that support and elevate white supremacy culture. We will. And that acknowledgement humbles me. It's like, I know I'm going to screw up, I know I'm going to make a mistake. How can I be better? What are the parts of me, that what is the privilege that it's not letting me see other people's experiences? And I need to go and listen, and listen hard, and listen out of a place of humbleness and not defensiveness,
Mm.
because that person experiences it's valid, and it's more important than my ego, you know. So what I do, it's I read a lot. The indigenous people history of the United States has been one book that I would recommend everybody to read, because
Mm-hmm.
it's so eye opening. And there are so many other resources out there, but I think, as Craig mentioned, our most important treasure here is people. We need to have relationships with people that are going to take us out of our comfort zone, but also that are not our immediate circle where we feel sheltered.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
Yeah,
that's a
come on.
challenge in United States, because in United States there are these niches, where people operate, and there's a lot of people that say, "Ooh, I have a Latino friend over there." They are not friends; they are acquaintances.
Mm.
So that's a person that's gonna think they love my culture, and they are gonna tell me, "Do you speak Mexican?" Well, I've been told that. So that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about true bonding and true relationship that goes both ways. That it's an honest relationship where we can both learn from each other. So that sort of community, the brave space that we were talking about, it's what help us grow.
Mm. Amen to that.
Mhm.
And I'll be remiss if we didn't make mention of one aspect of just this whole dominant culture narrative, and it's this idea of being able-bodied, right?
Mhm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
know, like, in our conversation, we didn't talk a whole lot about,
Mhm.
you know, ableism and
Yeah.
the importance of disability justice. So when we
Yes.
think about special education, when we think about students who
Mhm.
have IEPs, who have
Mhm.
504 plans,
Mhm.
how they're marginalized in their
Yes.
own regard within classroom communities and
Mhm.
greater school community. Um, that's something that tends to get overlooked in conversations
Yes.
regarding inclusive classrooms. So I just wanted to make sure that before we get off the live, we highlight that because it's something that requires more attention,
Mhm.
and it's an area that I personally am growing more in terms of just learning more about ableism and how what that looks like, the history of it,
Mhm.
because there are a lot of because it manifests itself in so many ways that we're not even aware of. So I'm still
Mhm.
growing in that regard.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that it's
So
the area where I need more. I need to grow the most. That's the area that I need to grow the most.
the
yes.
the indigenous peoples history of the United States, that book, like, it actually, there's a series. So there's like a queer history of the
Yes.
United States, there's a disabled history of the United States.
Wow.
And so, like, that's a really great series to kind
Yes.
of start learning with.
Yes. It is.
Yes. Highly recommended books for sure. So did say we're gonna do a quick lightning round before we get out of here. So I got a quick one here,
Mhm.
and it's fun. This is a fun question. So we all were in the classroom at one time, or still in the classroom. When you're walking into the classroom, what song is playing when you enter the classroom? What's your walk-in song?
Dynamite BTS. That's my song.
All
At
right.
least this year, when I was going through pandemia, all their songs, but especially that one, I would walk to school lighting up like dynamite. It felt like, "Oh, I'm doing this thing again, but I'm gonna try my best because I'm dynamite. I'm
There
shining
you
in the
go.
stars tonight." you know?
I am torn between "Be Alive" by Beyonce and "Toast"
Oh,
by Coffee. So those are the two that I'm like, right now I would be rocking.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah,
There you go.
it's tough to choose. I think maybe Beyonce's new song, Break My Soul.
Woo!
Cause
That song.
like I'm just like they can't break my soul.
Yes,
Ah,
yes, I love that
Yeah.
song. That's a song that was
Yes.
created for teachers.
It was. She knew. She knew.
Yes, she knows. She
We
knows.
needed that after
Yes,
this
yes,
year.
yes.
Shameless plug. Make sure y'all read my article about that very song on Education Post right now. Go to the website edpost.com. It's the feature. Y'all go check it out. Let me know how you feel. All right, y'all. Man, this has been a great panel discussion. Francoise, Craig, Destiny, thank y'all so much for taking time to chat with me. Love y'all. And oh yeah, this is the most important part because guess what? People need to know how they can connect with you. Because some of y'all need to be in schools talking to these teachers about how they can be inclusive in their practice. So I want to give y'all an opportunity to just share with listeners how they can connect with you on social media. And if you have any websites, share those as well. They'll also be in the episode notes for people to refer to, but I want to let y'all go ahead and do that. So Francoise, you can go ahead start off.
okay, I have a really cheesy username, but it's the brand has grown, so I cannot change it at this point. And in Instagram, where I'm the most active, I'm the woke Spanish teacher, and in Twitter, I'm TW as teacher. So if anybody wants to work with me, my resume, because I'm looking for a new community, it's also on my link tree in the bio in my Instagram. So you can find all my accolades there and also my personal email. And if you want to work with me, you can reach me out over there. Thank you.
All right.
Gracias.
All right, de nada. Go ahead, Craig.
Oh, let's see. Craig C. Martin, 12 at Twitter. But I'm like, yeah, I have a link tree as well. So if you do link tree, then Craig C. Martin, you'll get all kinds of stuff. And yeah, that's how you find me.
Man, let me help you out, man. Y'all can go to craigmartinleads.com as well. Check the
Oh,
man
yes.
out. He got services too. He being humble right now. Let me come on, man. I'm gonna help you out.
Yeah, I was creeping on your website before this. It looks awesome.
Same here. I was also stalking your website. I'm like, I need
Oh,
to work with Craig.
oh wow. Oh, too kind. Thank you.
All right. And of course, Destiny. Let us know.
Well, so I'm Discover Ed with Destiny, over on Instagram and Twitter if you're into that too. I also have a website, discoveredwithdestiny.com. You can reach out to me and contact me there if you'd like for me to come to your school, speak with your staff about inclusive practices for LGBTQ plus students. Um, and I also have a podcast. So I just recently launched a podcast. It's called Closeted History, LGBTQ plus stories of the past, where we talk about all the queer history you never knew.
Nice.
So I would love if you checked out the podcast. I also have a Instagram for the podcast as well. So Closeted History over on IG. And yeah, that's me.
Yes. And y'all need to follow all their accounts and subscribe to the Closeted History podcast, including this one as well. All right. So once again, thank y'all for joining me. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with y'all.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to
Such a
be with all
pleasure.
of you.
Yes. And on behalf of my three phenomenal panelists, this is a wrap, y'all. We're wrapping up another episode of My Day Talk for Educators Live, and this was a special one. So, as always, I wish you all a good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.